King's Guard and Corporal hold back laughter. Horse did this. Horse guards, Royal Guard, King's Guard. The sky was painted in shades of soft orange and pale pink, and a gentle breeze moved across the courtyard, carrying the faint scent of fresh grass and flowers from the palace gardens. It was another ordinary day for the King's Guard, the elite group of soldiers tasked with protecting the royal family and maintaining tradition. Despite the routine of daily life, each morning was a reminder of honor, discipline, and responsibility. The palace stables were alive with the quiet sounds of preparation. Horses shifted their hooves against the wooden floor, their breaths forming little clouds in the chilly morning air. Some nickered softly, while others tossed their heads, shaking loose their long, flowing manes. The King's Guard moved with precision among them, checking saddles, brushing coats, and ensuring that every bit of equipment was polished to perfection. Their uniforms gleamed, the bright red tunics shining against the dull brown of the stables, and the polished helmets reflected the sunlight streaming through the open doors. Corporal James was standing near the front, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning each horse and guard with practiced attention. He had been part of the King's Guard for many years and was known for his keen sense of discipline and patience. Despite his serious nature, there was a warmth in his eyes for the horses he worked with every day. Today, as always, he moved among them with care, speaking softly to calm the animals while also keeping a close eye on the young guards learning the ropes. The routine of the morning was almost ceremonial in itself. Guards adjusted the straps on saddles, checked the stirrups, and made sure that every horse's mane was neat. Even the smallest detail mattered. A loose strap or an untidy mane could reflect poorly on the guard responsible, and in this world, pride in appearance and skill was taken seriously. Yet, amidst all this order, there was a sense of quiet companionship between the guards and their horses. These were not just animals to them. They were partners in duty, friends in the early hours of the day, and often the only source of light-hearted moments in an otherwise strict environment. Titan, a strong, spirited horse with a glossy brown coat and a white streak running down his face, was among the most notable of the stable. He had been with the King's Guard for several years and was known for his lively personality. Titan had a way of sensing moods, calming down when the guards were serious, and occasionally showing a playful side when he sensed someone trying to hide a smile. Today, Titan was restless, shifting from hoof to hoof and letting out small snorts. His large eyes were alert, scanning the activity in the stable, and his ears twitched at every sound. Corporal James approached him, patting his neck gently. "Easy, Titan," he murmured. "We've got a big day ahead, but there's nothing to worry about." The other horses seemed to sense Titan's energy, some mirroring his restlessness, while others remained calm, their steady breathing filling the air with rhythm. The guards worked quietly, their movements precise, but there was an unspoken understanding that any disruption in this carefully balanced morning could ripple through the rest of the day. Corporal James knew this better than anyone. He had learned that maintaining focus and control required patience, understanding, and sometimes a bit of humor, even when it was inappropriate to show it. As the minutes passed, the guards began lining up with their horses, preparing for the ceremonial inspection that was scheduled for mid-morning. The royal band would arrive, and every movement of both man and animal needed to be exact. This was not just tradition. It was a demonstration of skill, respect, and commitment. Every guard felt the weight of history on their shoulders, yet there was also an excitement that came with performing a routine that had been perfected over decades. Corporal James walked down the line, inspecting each guard and horse. He adjusted a strap here, straightened a helmet there, and offered quiet words of encouragement. "Good posture, Lieutenant," he said to a young guard. "Steady hands, Private. Remember, the horse feels your confidence." Every piece of advice was delivered with care, ensuring that the young guards understood not just the actions required, but the spirit behind them. While the atmosphere was serious, there were small signs of life and character among the horses that made the morning interesting. A horse might nuzzle its rider's shoulder, a tail would swish to chase away a fly, or a soft nicker would break the silence, reminding everyone present that, despite the formality, this was a living, breathing space. Corporal James smiled quietly to himself, appreciating these little moments. They were reminders that while the duty was strict, life had a way of finding humor and joy even in the most disciplined settings. The young guards, many of whom were experiencing their first full morning in the stable, watched closely. Their movements were precise, but their eyes often betrayed curiosity and excitement. They had trained for years in drills and marches, but this daily routine brought them face to face with the real heart of the King's Guard, the bond between soldier and horse. Corporal James noticed their cautious glances at Titan, the spirited horse, and knew they were anticipating some kind of mischief. Titan, for his part, seemed fully aware of the attention and appeared to enjoy the curiosity directed at him. As the line was finalized and the guards adjusted their positions, the palace clock began to chime the hour. The sound echoed through the courtyard, signaling the start of the formal inspection. Horses shifted nervously, some stepping in place, while others tilted their heads to watch the guards on either side. Corporal James gave Titan a reassuring pat and whispered, "This is your time, old friend. Stay calm and we'll get through it together." Titan snorted in response, as if understanding the words, his hooves tapping lightly against the stable floor in anticipation. The ceremonial air settled over the scene. Every guard was perfectly aligned, every horse poised and ready. The sunlight gleamed off polished armor and helmets, and the sounds of hooves and soft snorts created a rhythm that felt almost musical. For a moment, the world outside the stables ceased to exist. Here, there was only discipline, tradition, and the unspoken promise that every guard and horse would perform their roles flawlessly. Yet, despite the seriousness of the moment, there was an underlying tension, a quiet awareness that anything could happen. Titan shifted slightly, his eyes glinting with intelligence and mischief. Corporal James kept a watchful gaze, knowing that even the smallest action from a spirited horse could turn the morning from orderly to chaotic in an instant. It was this mix of discipline, unpredictability, and silent humor that made mornings in the royal stables unforgettable. As the first notes of the royal band began to drift from the nearby courtyard, signaling the start of the inspection, every guard tightened his posture, every horse held its head high, and every eye was focused on the ceremony ahead. Yet deep in the stable, the playful energy of Titan lingered like a quiet promise. Something unexpected was brewing, something that would test the composure of even the most disciplined members of the King's Guard. And in that moment, Corporal James allowed himself a brief, private smile, knowing that the morning, as ordinary as it seemed, might hold a story worth remembering. The gates of the palace stood tall and imposing, reflecting the sunlight as if to emphasize the importance of the day. Guards who had walked this path countless times felt the familiar weight of history pressing down upon them. Yet even in this grandeur, there was a sense of anticipation. For the King's Guard, each day was a blend of precision, loyalty, and the subtle unpredictability of the animals they served with. And in this ordinary morning, with its soft sunlight and quiet energy, the seeds of a moment that would later bring laughter were quietly being sown. The morning had settled into a steady rhythm. The royal band's faint music drifted in the distance, signaling that the ceremonial inspection was about to begin. The King's Guard stood in perfect formation, their boots polished and uniforms crisp. Each guard's posture reflected years of discipline, and each horse's stance mirrored the training and trust that had been built over countless mornings like this one. Yet, beneath the surface of this calm, something stirred in the stables, an energy that was impossible to ignore. Titan, the spirited horse, pawed at the ground, tossing his mane with a flourish that seemed almost theatrical. His large brown eyes sparkled with intelligence, and his ears twitched at every sound around him. He was not a horse that followed blindly. He had a personality, a sense of timing, and a playful streak that sometimes appeared at the most unexpected moments. Corporal James approached him, gently placing a hand on his neck. "Easy there, Titan," he murmured. "Focus now. This is no time for tricks." Despite the corporal's warning, Titan's restlessness was palpable. He shifted from one hoof to another, snorted softly, and flicked his tail. The other horses seemed to sense his energy. Some mirrored his movement, nudging each other gently, while others remained calm, their steady breathing filling the space with rhythm. The young guards, many still new to this environment, exchanged glances. They were eager to perform perfectly, but the unpredictable nature of working with animals made every moment both exciting and nerve-wracking. Corporal James continued his rounds, checking each horse and guard. He adjusted a strap here, smoothed a mane there, and whispered words of encouragement. "Steady hands, Private. Feel the rhythm and the horse will follow you," he said, watching as a young guard tightened his grip on the reins. The lesson was as much about patience and connection as it was about precision. Every guard had to understand that the horse was a partner, not just a tool for ceremony. Titan seemed to sense this, calming slightly under the corporal's touch, yet his eyes retained a spark that hinted at his playful intentions. The palace courtyard outside began to fill with activity. Servants moved quietly, arranging flowers, checking the gates, and preparing the space for the inspection. The sounds of hooves and soft snorts from the stables mingled with the distant notes of the royal band. It was a symphony of routine, yet underneath the harmony there was tension. Every detail mattered. A single misstep could disrupt the flow of the ceremony, and for the king's guard, disruption was never acceptable. Titan, however, had a different idea. As Corporal James stepped back to observe the lineup, Titan let out a soft snort, lifting his head high. It was subtle, almost like a challenge. The horse pawed the ground again, the sound sharp against the wooden floor, and the young guards glanced nervously at one another. They had trained for obedience and precision, but animals, even the most well-trained, had minds of their own. Titan seemed to be testing them, a quiet reminder that life did not always follow rules. The corporal's attention shifted to the formation itself. Every guard had a designated position, every horse a place to stand. The lines were straight, the spacing even, and the overall effect was one of order and grace. Yet, as he walked along the row, Titan's playful energy was impossible to ignore. The horse's movements were small but deliberate, a flick of the tail, a slight shift of the hooves, a tilt of the head. Each action drew the eyes of the young guards, who tried their best to remain focused while hiding their amusement. Corporal James, ever observant, noticed the subtle glances exchanged among the guards. He knew what they were thinking. Titan had that effect on people. The horse's intelligence and timing often led to moments that were humorous, despite the seriousness of the situation. The corporal shook his head slightly, suppressing a smile. It was part of his role to maintain discipline, but he had long learned that trying to fight the personality of a horse like Titan was often a lost cause. Patience and preparation were the best tools a guard could have. The young guards continued their efforts, adjusting reins, checking stirrups, and keeping their posture perfect. Yet, the tension between strict discipline and the horse's playful energy created a strange mix of focus and anticipation. Every little noise, every movement, made the guards flinch slightly, unsure whether it was part of the ceremony or a prelude to Titan's mischief. Corporal James kept a steady presence beside the horse, ready to intervene if needed, but also allowing the young guards to learn firsthand how to handle unpredictable situations. Outside the stables, the first notes of the royal band grew louder. The guards stiffened, their eyes forward, and every horse responded in kind. Titan lifted his head, ears pricked, and exhaled a soft snort. The rhythm of the music seemed to stir something within him. He pawed the ground once more, shifting his weight, as if rehearsing a secret performance only he knew about. Corporal James placed a steady hand on his neck, whispering, "Hold it together, Titan. Now is the time for grace." The horse's eyes met his, and for a brief moment it seemed as though there was a silent conversation, a mutual understanding that something extraordinary could happen in the midst of ordinary duty. The guards were almost ready. The young men and women had adjusted their positions, their expressions serious, and the stables had quieted down, save for the soft breathing of the horses. Titan remained restless, yet there was a tension in the air that hinted at something about to unfold. The corporal knew that training and discipline could only take them so far. Instinct, timing, and the unpredictable nature of animals always had a role to play. As the clock outside ticked closer to the hour of the inspection, Titan's energy seemed to peak. He let out another snort, flicked his tail dramatically, and gave a gentle but deliberate nudge to the horse next to him. The subtle movements created a ripple effect. The young guards tried to maintain perfect posture, but it was clear that the horse's playful spirit was spreading through the line. Some guards shifted slightly, adjusting to the horse's energy, while others bit their lips to suppress a smile. Corporal James remained calm, but he too felt the humorous tension building. The palace gates began to open, and the royal band stepped into view. The notes floated through the air, signaling the start of the ceremony. Every guard stood taller, every horse lifted its head, and the stables seemed to hold its breath. Titan, however, had not forgotten his mischievous streak. His eyes darted around, catching glimpses of the young guards, nervous expressions, the corporal's steady gaze, and the rhythm of the approaching music. It was as if he were calculating the perfect moment to make his presence felt in a way that no one would forget. Corporal James tightened his grip on Titan's reins gently, sensing the exact moment when discipline and spontaneity would collide. The young guards straightened their backs, adjusting to the final instructions, their hearts pounding with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. They knew the inspection was serious, but the unpredictability of the horses added a layer of excitement they had never experienced in their training. Titan's subtle snorts, shifting weight, and expressive eyes hinted that the ordinary morning could soon turn into an extraordinary story, one that would be remembered with laughter and fondness for years to come. Titan's energy was contagious. The guards tried to maintain focus, but the horse's playful behavior had a way of creeping into their awareness, creating tiny moments of shared amusement that had to be suppressed. Corporal James walked along the line one final time, patting Titan's neck, adjusting a strap, and offering a quiet word of encouragement to each young guard. "Stay calm, trust the horse, focus on the rhythm," he whispered. The instructions were simple, but in the context of the ceremony, they carried profound meaning. Trust, patience, and the ability to remain composed in the face of unexpected moments were just as important as any drill or uniform polish. The tension in the stable was now at its peak. The royal band's music grew louder, echoing across the courtyard and signaling the start of the official inspection. Every guard's eyes were forward, every horse's head lifted high, and the sense of anticipation was almost tangible. Titan pawed the ground lightly one last time, a subtle warning that something playful was about to happen. Corporal James tightened his hold on the reins gently, ready to maintain control, but also secretly curious about what the spirited horse might do. The moment was a delicate balance between discipline and unpredictability, tradition and spontaneity. As the ceremonial inspection began, Titan's restless energy met the structured rhythm of the king's guard. The guards moved in perfect synchronization, their boots echoing on the stone floor, while the horses followed with remarkable precision. Yet beneath the surface, the horse's playful nature lingered, a reminder that even in the most formal situations, life had a way of surprising those who paid attention. Corporal James watched closely, sensing that the stage was set for a moment that would bring laughter, humility, and a story worth telling. And in that quiet, charged moment, Titan shifted slightly, lifted his head, and snorted, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that hinted at the mischief to come. The young guards exchanged quick glances, trying to guess what the horse might do next, while Corporal James kept a steady hand and calm demeanor. Outside, the palace seemed to hold its breath, unaware that a simple, spirited horse was about to remind the king's guard that even in the most disciplined moments, joy and laughter could not be denied. The royal band's music floated through the air, filling the courtyard with a steady rhythm. Every note echoed across the stone floors, mingling with the soft snorts and shifting hooves of the horses. The king's guard, standing tall and precise, followed the timing perfectly. Their movements were synchronized, their boots hitting the ground in unison, and their polished helmets glimmered in the morning sun. It was a picture of discipline, precision, and elegance, a scene that looked flawless from any distance. Yet beneath this perfect display of order, Titan was plotting his small moment of mischief. The spirited horse shifted his weight slightly, tapping his hooves in a rhythm that seemed almost musical. His large eyes glimmered with intelligence, and his ears flicked back and forth, taking in the sights and sounds of the ceremony. He had waited for this moment all morning, the perfect timing of the music, the young guard's nervous attention, and the corporal's calm presence creating an opportunity he could not resist. Corporal James, sensing Titan's subtle excitement, placed a steady hand on the horse's neck. "Easy now," he whispered softly. "Just a little longer and we'll get through this." Despite his words, he could feel the horse's energy pressing against the reins. Titan's playful nature was well known among the guards, and though they respected the animal's strength and intelligence, they also knew that he had a way of surprising them at the most inconvenient and often hilarious moments. The young guards, standing in formation, tried their best to maintain focus. Their posture was perfect, their eyes forward and their hands steady on the reins. Yet every subtle movement from Titan drew their attention. A flick of his tail, a small shuffle of his hooves, even the soft snort he occasionally released made their hearts skip a beat. They had been trained to control their expressions, to remain serious no matter what, but this was different. Titan's personality was impossible to ignore, and anticipation filled the air like electricity. The inspection had officially begun. The royal band played louder, signaling the start of the formal review. Every guard and horse moved in careful synchronization, the polished boots echoing sharply against the stone. Each step was measured, each posture precise. From a distance, it seemed like a perfect performance, flawless in every detail. But up close, the tension was palpable. Titan shifted, pawed the ground, and tilted his head, teasing both Corporal James and the young guards. Titan's moment came quietly but with perfect timing. As the band reached a particularly dramatic note, he let out a loud, sharp snort that echoed across the courtyard. The sound was so sudden and so perfectly timed that it startled both the guards and the horses around him. Some horses pranced nervously, while others flicked their ears in surprise. The young guard's eyes widened, and a nervous ripple of suppressed giggles moved through the line. Corporal James kept a firm hand on Titan's reins, trying his best to maintain composure, but he felt his own lips twitch with the beginnings of a smile. The moment was brief, but the effect was enormous. Titan, sensing that he had captured attention, shifted his weight and gave a small, playful stomp with one hoof. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, and somehow matched the music from the royal band. The guards, struggling to maintain their posture, found it impossible to ignore the horse's antics. One young guard bit his lip so hard that it nearly hurt, trying to suppress the laughter rising from the absurdity of the situation. Another let out a small, nervous cough, which only made it harder to keep control. Corporal James' eyes darted across the formation. He could see the subtle glances being exchanged, the tension between the need for discipline and the urge to laugh. Every guard was fighting an internal battle. The King's Guard were trained to remain composed in the face of distraction, danger, or ceremony, but nothing in their training had prepared them for the combination of timing, personality, and intelligence that Titan displayed. It was a test of patience, self-control, and humor all in one. Titan continued his subtle performance. He lifted his head high, snorted again, and flicked his tail with precise timing to the beat of the music. It was almost as if he were performing a private dance for the guards, a playful commentary on the formality surrounding him. The young guards' attention wavered, their eyes flitting between the horse, the corporal, and the strict posture they were supposed to maintain. Every muscle in their bodies tensed, ready to move in perfect formation, yet drawn irresistibly to the horse's antics. Corporal James adjusted his grip, leaning slightly closer to Titan. "Focus," he whispered. "We are almost through it." But even he could not help the small, involuntary smile that appeared at the corner of his mouth. Titan's intelligence and timing were remarkable, and even the most disciplined soldiers could not deny the humor in the situation. The combination of music, timing, and personality created a perfect storm of playful chaos disguised as a formal ceremony. The royal band reached its crescendo, the notes rising and falling dramatically. Titan, feeling the energy, decided it was time for one last flourish. He gave a soft nicker, lifted one hoof slightly, and then shifted his head in a way that made the young guards glance at each other with suppressed laughter. The timing was impeccable, landing just as the corporal adjusted his stance to maintain order. The contrast between the formal, disciplined movements of the guards and the playful, unpredictable actions of Titan was almost comical in its perfection. One young guard, struggling hardest of all, nearly lost his composure. His eyes twitched, his lips trembled, and he let out a tiny, nearly inaudible laugh that he immediately tried to cover with a cough. The guards nearby suppressed small giggles as well, each silently acknowledging the difficulty of the moment. Corporal James, ever vigilant, caught the eye of one of the younger soldiers and offered a subtle nod, a silent message of encouragement. They were expected to remain serious, but the horse had reminded them that laughter was part of life, even in the most disciplined of settings. As the inspection continued, Titan finally settled slightly, though his playful energy was still present in small gestures. A flick of the ear, a shuffle of the hooves, a soft snort timed to the music. The young guards, now more aware of his personality, adjusted their own focus. Some struggled, still biting lips or covering small smiles, while others watched with wide-eyed amusement, marveling at the horse's timing and intelligence. Corporal James allowed himself a quiet chuckle, a rare moment of humor shared silently with the horse and the young guards. The courtyard seemed alive with both discipline and subtle laughter. Even the other horses responded to Titan's playful behavior, some moving slightly in rhythm with him, others shifting nervously but obediently. The young guards had learned an important lesson. Discipline was not just about strict adherence to rules, but also about understanding and responding to the personality and energy of the animals they worked with. Titan had turned an ordinary morning into an unforgettable experience, demonstrating that connection, patience, and humor could coexist with precision and formality. By the time the royal band's music began to fade, Titan had returned to a calmer state. The young guards straightened, their posture once again perfect, though their eyes betrayed the amusement and amazement of what had just occurred. Corporal James patted Titan's neck one final time, whispering, "Well done, old friend. You've made this morning unforgettable." The horse nuzzled his hand gently, as if acknowledging the compliment, and the moment of playful chaos settled into the calm of routine once more. The inspection concluded smoothly. The royal band played the final notes, the guards and horses returned to their positions, and the palace gates reflected the sunlight like a silent witness to the morning's events. The young guards had learned more than they could have imagined about discipline, timing, and the unpredictable nature of life. Titan, spirited and clever, had reminded them that even the most formal, serious moments could carry joy, laughter, and unforgettable memories. As the king's guard dismounted and the horses were led back to the stables, the young guards exchanged quiet smiles and whispered reflections. They had experienced something remarkable, a moment when tradition, discipline, and humor intersected perfectly. Corporal James walked beside Titan, his expression calm but satisfied, knowing that today's morning would be talked about for years to come. The spirited horse had done more than entertain. He had taught a lesson in timing, patience, and the importance of appreciating life's lighter moments, even in the midst of serious duty. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, bathing the palace in golden light, the king's guard and their horses returned to their usual routines. Yet the memory of Titan's playful antics lingered, a reminder that even the most disciplined soldiers could be touched by humor, joy, and the surprising brilliance of a clever, spirited horse. The royal courtyard was now quiet, yet charged with an energy that was hard to ignore. The formal inspection had passed, and the music of the royal band had faded into distant notes, leaving behind a rhythm only the horses and guards seemed to feel. Titan, the spirited brown horse with the playful streak, had settled slightly, but there was still a mischievous twinkle in his eyes. Corporal James could feel it, and so could the young guards who were now trying their best to return to composure. It was one thing to maintain discipline during the ceremony, but it was another to control the laughter that threatened to burst out at any moment. Titan had shown his intelligence, timing, and personality so perfectly that the memory of his antics lingered in every young guard's mind. Some of them struggled to straighten their posture fully, their muscles tense as they silently fought to contain the smiles and giggles rising from the shared experience. Corporal James noticed the subtle glances, the twitching lips, and the rapid blinking that betrayed the struggle. "Focus," he said softly to a nearby guard, placing a reassuring hand on the horse's mane. "Breathe. Keep your mind in the moment." His voice was calm, but even he could not entirely hide the small smile threatening to break through. Titan snorted softly as if acknowledging the situation, a gentle puff of breath that made a young guard's lip twitch again. It was impossible to ignore. The horse seemed to understand perfectly the effect he had created, and he appeared to enjoy the attention in a quiet, clever way. The young guards, though trained extensively in maintaining discipline, found themselves in uncharted territory. They had prepared for drills, for commands, for ceremonial precision, but not for a horse that could so perfectly combine timing, humor, and intelligence. One guard shifted his weight, hoping to appear steady, and nearly lost control of his expression. He pressed his lips together, trying to bite back the laugh that threatened to escape. Another covered his mouth with the back of his hand, sneaking a glance at his neighbors, who were fighting the same invisible battle. Corporal James continued his rounds, walking slowly among the horses, adjusting reins and whispering quiet instructions. He understood that discipline was important, but he also knew that these moments of levity were rare and valuable. A horse like Titan, with his spirit and timing, was not something to scold or suppress entirely. Instead, it was a lesson in patience, composure, and the subtle art of managing unpredictable energy. The corporal allowed himself a private chuckle as Titan shifted slightly under his hand, flicking his tail in perfect rhythm with the faint echo of the music still lingering in the courtyard. The young guards were finding it harder to maintain control. Their bodies were rigid, yet their eyes betrayed amusement. Some of them tried to focus on the reins, on the horses' movements, or on the distant palace gates, anything that could distract them from the memory of Titan's antics. But the horses' performance had been so perfect, so well-timed, that it seemed to replay in their minds like a private show. The tension between the need for discipline and the urge to laugh created a silent struggle, one that each guard fought with all their training, yet often lost in small, involuntary ways. Titan, sensing the collective energy, seemed to encourage it subtly. He lifted his head slightly, giving a soft snort that made the guards glance down instinctively, worried that another misstep might occur. But there was no misstep, only the quiet reminder that life and humor could exist even in the midst of strict formality. Corporal James patted Titan's neck, whispering, "That's enough now, old friend. Let's give them a chance to breathe." Yet even as he spoke, the horse's gentle presence continued to elicit suppressed laughter and amusement among the guards. One young guard, who had been particularly serious throughout the morning, let his shoulder twitch slightly as he tried to control a chuckle. Another tapped his foot nervously, a small rhythm echoing the one Titan had made earlier, betraying the playful energy that lingered in the air. The tension was almost physical, a mix of seriousness and humor, discipline and delight, and Corporal James walked among them, adjusting reins and offering quiet encouragement. "Breathe," he whispered again. "Focus on the horse, on your stance, and not on what just happened." It was advice that sounded simple, but was almost impossible to follow when a horse had just created a memorable moment of light-hearted chaos. The courtyard seemed to pulse with the shared struggle. The young guards were united in their efforts to maintain composure, and yet they were individually fighting private battles. Every small movement from Titan, the flick of his ear, the subtle tap of his hoof, or the soft breath he released, reminded them of the moment that had just passed. Corporal James moved deliberately, keeping his presence calm and reassuring, yet he too was human, and he allowed a small smile to break through as Titan's clever timing replayed in his mind. Titan's subtle playfulness became a quiet performance, almost like a conversation without words. The horse seemed to ask, without asking at all, whether they could truly remain serious, whether discipline was enough to suppress the natural joy that came from observing his antics. The young guards tried, but the mental images of his perfectly timed snorts and playful hoof taps continued to surface, making it impossible to ignore. Corporal James recognized the value in this. Training was not just about perfection, but about learning to handle unexpected moments gracefully. The minutes passed slowly, each one a careful balance between maintaining composure and acknowledging the humor that lingered. The young guards shifted, adjusted their reins and focused on breathing, but Titan's presence made the task challenging. Corporal James walked slowly beside him, offering quiet guidance and gentle corrections, reinforcing the discipline that was expected, but also allowing space for the small moments of levity that were inevitable. The horse's clever timing had made a lasting impression, and the lesson was not lost on anyone present. The other horses in the line, having observed Titan's playful behavior, were now more alert, their ears twitching at every sound. Some mirrored Titan's energy in subtle ways, lifting a hoof or flicking a tail, adding to the quiet ripple of movement that made the young guards even more aware of their surroundings. Each subtle action became a test of patience, observation, and self-control. Corporal James observed them all with practiced eyes, recognizing the delicate balance between discipline and personality. The young guards finally began to settle. Their breathing evened, their hands steadied, and their eyes focused forward. Yet the suppressed laughter remained, a quiet undercurrent beneath their composed exteriors. Each one had experienced the same internal struggle, and the shared experience created a subtle bond between them. Titan, sensing the shift in energy, relaxed slightly, his head lowering in a calm and reassuring gesture. Corporal James smiled quietly to himself, knowing that the morning had been a success, not just in terms of ceremony, but in teaching a valuable lesson about patience, humor, and connection. The courtyard, once charged with playful tension, now returned to a gentle calm. The young guards exchanged small, private smiles and subtle nods, acknowledging the struggle they had just overcome. Corporal James walked Titan back toward the stables, patting his neck gently and whispering, "Well done. You've taught them more than any drill ever could." Titan nuzzled his hand in response, as if understanding the compliment, and the quiet moment reinforced the bond between horse and human. Even after returning to their positions, the memory of Titan's antics continued to linger. The young guards found themselves recalling the perfectly timed snorts, the playful hoof taps, and the mischievous glances. Each recall brought a small, suppressed smile or chuckle, a reminder that even in the most disciplined settings, life and humor had a way of asserting themselves. Corporal James observed this quietly, appreciating the subtle lesson the horse had provided. Discipline and composure were essential, but so was the ability to recognize and embrace joy when it appeared unexpectedly. By the time the ceremony concluded fully, the king's guard and their horses had returned to a state of complete order. The palace gates reflected the sunlight like polished mirrors, and the distant notes of the royal band had faded entirely. Yet the energy of the morning, the quiet laughter, and the playful memory of Titan's antics remained in the hearts and minds of every young guard present. Corporal James led the horse back to the stables, his calm demeanor masking the amusement he felt inside. The morning had been extraordinary in its ordinary way. A routine inspection had turned into a memorable story of humor, timing, and personality. Titan had reminded the young guards, and even the seasoned corporal, that life was full of surprises, and that laughter, even in small doses, was an essential part of human and animal connection. The lesson was clear. Discipline was important, but so was joy. Patience, composure, and subtle humor were all part of the experience, and every guard had now learned this firsthand. And as Titan settled into the stable, gently nuzzling the feed bucket, the young guards left the courtyard with subtle smiles, careful not to let their laughter escape in public. They had learned something they would carry with them forever, that even the most disciplined moments could hold unexpected joy, that a spirited horse could teach lessons beyond training, and that laughter was never far away when one was attentive, patient, and ready to embrace life's surprises. The day had fully arrived, and sunlight poured over the palace grounds, casting long golden beams across the courtyard. The morning ceremony was behind them, but the memory of what had happened still lingered in the air. Titan, the spirited brown horse, stood calmly in the stables now, chewing quietly on hay, yet the energy he had brought to the morning remained in the hearts and minds of every king's guard and young recruit. The horse's mischievous act had become the highlight of the day, a reminder that life often surprises even the most disciplined people in the most unexpected ways. Corporal James walked slowly through the stables, checking each horse with gentle hands, making sure every animal was comfortable and calm. Titan nuzzled his hand, acknowledging him, and the corporal felt a wave of pride. Today had been more than a routine inspection. It had been a lesson in patience, connection, and the quiet power of joy. The young guards, though exhausted from the mental effort of maintaining discipline while suppressing laughter, were quietly buzzing with amusement. They had faced a challenge unlike any other, keeping composure in the presence of a horse that seemed to have perfect timing and a playful personality of its own. The young guards moved through the stables, brushing their horses, adjusting saddles, and speaking softly to the animals. Yet every movement was colored by the morning's events. Every snort, every flick of a tail, Every pawing of the ground reminded them of Titan's clever timing. Small smiles appeared on faces that had fought hard to remain serious, and a quiet sense of camaraderie grew among the recruits. They had shared a moment that was equal parts discipline, humor, and unexpected delight, a memory that would stay with them for years. Corporal James stopped to watch them. The pride in his eyes was clear, not only because they had completed the ceremonial inspection with skill, but also because they had learned an important lesson. Discipline and humor were not enemies. A spirited horse like Titan could teach more about patience, timing, and composure than any drill or instruction manual. The young guards were learning to read subtle cues, to understand the personality of their horses, and to balance strictness with empathy. These lessons were as important as any parade or inspection, shaping them into better soldiers and better partners to their animals. Titan moved slightly, shifting his hooves and flicking his ears as if acknowledging the attention he was receiving. Corporal James smiled and whispered, "You've done well, old friend. Today you reminded everyone why this job is about more than discipline. It's about connection and understanding." The horse snorted softly, a sound that carried both satisfaction and playful pride, and nuzzled the corporal's hand in a gesture that seemed almost human. It was a quiet moment of reflection, a pause in the busy life of the palace, where the bond between human and animal shone clearly. The young guards, having finished their routines with their own horses, gathered quietly to watch Titan. They exchanged glances and small nods, silently acknowledging the cleverness of the horse and the subtle chaos he had brought to the morning. One of them whispered, barely audible, "I don't think I've ever seen a horse like that before." Another replied with a quiet laugh, "He's like he knows exactly what he's doing and when to do it." Corporal James overheard them and simply nodded, appreciating that they had recognized the intelligence, timing, and personality that made Titan so extraordinary. As the day progressed, stories of Titan's antics began to spread quietly among the palace staff. Servants who had glimpsed the ceremonial inspection smiled knowingly to one another, recounting in hushed tones how a single horse had almost made the disciplined king's guard laugh openly. It became a story of charm, intelligence, and perfect timing, a story that would grow into legend within the walls of the palace. Even those who had not witnessed the moment firsthand found themselves drawn to the tale, eager to hear about the morning, when a spirited horse reminded the king's guard that humor could not be entirely suppressed. Corporal James led Titan out to the paddock for exercise, allowing him to stretch his legs and release the final bits of restless energy. The morning's tension had dissipated, replaced by a gentle calm that made the horses' movements fluid and graceful. Titan moved with elegance, yet there was still a spark of playfulness in his stride. The young guards observed him carefully, noting how even a horse accustomed to routine could maintain personality, intelligence, and timing within the boundaries of discipline. They were learning a lesson not just in ceremony, but in life. Attention, patience, and understanding revealed the richness of every experience. As Titan trotted in the paddock, the young guards practiced drills with their own horses, carrying with them the subtle memory of the morning. The corporal walked among them, offering guidance and quiet encouragement. "Notice the small movements," he said. "Every hoof, every flick of the tail, every glance is communication. Respect it, understand it, and you will be in harmony with your horse." The recruits nodded, their eyes attentive and their movements careful. They had learned that discipline was only part of the equation. Awareness, connection, and timing were equally important. The palace clock chimed again, signaling the middle of the day. Servants moved about, attending to their duties, but the memory of the morning lingered like a warm, invisible thread through the air. Titan paused mid-stride, lifting his head to observe the courtyard, and the young guards instinctively straightened, remembering the energy and timing that had almost disrupted their discipline. Corporal James smiled quietly, appreciating the way the horse had taught lessons without words, using only intelligence, timing, and a bit of playful personality. By the afternoon, the story of Titan's morning antics had become more than just a memory. It was a quiet legend among the guards. The young recruits, once nervous and uncertain, now shared a bond that went beyond drills and instructions. They had experienced a shared moment of tension, amusement, and learning that connected them to the horses, and to each other in a way that formal training could not. Corporal James observed this quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment in seeing both horse and humans grow from the morning's experience. As Titan returned to his stall after exercise, he was greeted with gentle pats and words of appreciation. Even the youngest guard, who had struggled most to maintain composure during the ceremony, approached quietly to brush his mane and whisper, "Good job, Titan. You really made today special." The horse lifted his head, nuzzled the guard's hand, and let out a soft snort that seemed to say, "I know." The small interaction, filled with trust, respect, and quiet humor, exemplified the bond that had developed between horse and human that morning. The afternoon sun grew warmer, casting long shadows across the stables. Corporal James led the young guards in a final round of checks, observing their posture, attention to detail, and connection with their horses. Titan watched from his stall, calm but alert, as if overseeing the continuation of the lessons he had taught earlier. The young guards moved with confidence now, their nerves replaced by understanding and respect. They had learned that even in the most formal and disciplined moments, joy, humor, and personality were powerful forces that enhanced, rather than diminished, their work. As the palace prepared for evening routines, the guards gathered briefly to reflect on the day. Corporal James spoke quietly, reminding them of the importance of connection, patience, and awareness. "Discipline is essential," he said, "but never forget the lessons life teaches in unexpected ways." Today, Titan reminded us that intelligence, timing, and a little humor are as important as any drill. Respect your horse, observe carefully, and you will always find wisdom in the most surprising moments. The young guards nodded, the memory of the morning etched clearly in their minds. By sunset, the stables were calm. Titan had settled into a peaceful rhythm, chewing quietly on hay, while the young guards moved carefully, completing their routines with a newfound sense of confidence and understanding. The story of the morning, once a moment of tension and suppressed laughter, had grown into a lesson of patience, connection, and subtle humor. Corporal James walked slowly through the stables, observing the calm energy and quiet smiles. He knew that today's events would be remembered and retold for years. A story of a spirited horse, disciplined guards, and the laughter that could not be entirely contained. As the palace lights began to glow in the evening, the young guards left the stables one by one, each carrying a private smile. Titan's playful energy, his clever timing, and his ability to teach through action had left an indelible mark. Corporal James lingered a moment longer, patting the horse gently. "Well done, old friend," he whispered. "You've given them a story they will never forget." Titan responded with a soft snort and a gentle nuzzle, a quiet affirmation of the bond they shared and the lessons imparted. That night, the palace settled into quiet serenity. The guards reflected on the morning, the laughter, and the clever horse that had taught them so much. Titan, resting peacefully in his stall, had reminded everyone that discipline, patience, and training were essential, but so were humor, timing, and the subtle joys of life. The story of the morning would be told and retold, becoming a legend among the king's guard, a tale of a spirited horse, the struggle to maintain composure, and the quiet, lasting lessons of connection, patience, and laughter. And as the moon rose over the palace grounds, casting a silver glow across the courtyard, Titan slept peacefully, while the king's guard dreamed of a morning that had begun with discipline but ended with joy. A horse had reminded them that even in the strictest routines, life had room for laughter, personality, and unforgettable moments that would be remembered forever.